Today, I am delighted to welcome my dear friend Kate Mulgrew to have a conversation with me about the inspirational relationship between science fiction and real science and exploration. Kate is a dear friend since our years together on Star Trek Voyager, and she will always be my captain.
I'm delighted to be here with you. You will always be my doctor, although that has sort of hidden connotations we will not explore during this interview.
Yes, we will not. We're not going to go down had it been later in the day and we'd had a glass of wine, we could do the playing Dr. Jones.
Oh, how we love those rabbit holes when we've had our little bit of wine. Yes, but let's talk about that relationship. It is inspirational, Bob. Very.
I never set out. I set out to be an actor, never necessarily to be an actor best known for playing a hologram in the 24th century. People don't often understand that as actors, we play a variety of different roles, hopefully on stage and in television and movies, as Kate has. For those of you who don't know, Kate is an extraordinarily accomplished theater actress. I've seen her on Broadway multiple times, off Broadway, most recently in that wonderful play you did that was very science related about two extraordinary women called The Half-Life of Marie Curie.
Right. In which I played Hertha Ayrton, who was a British scientist, inventor, physicist, suffragette, extraordinary woman, and by many accounts saved Marie Curie's life after her notorious affair with a married man, after which she was exiled from the scientific community of France. And Hertha Ayrton fled with her from France to her seaside home in England. And they spent a summer there. And it was during that time that Marie Curie regained her sense of self. And thank God she did, because these two brilliant scientists have left a legacy unparalleled, I think, in the history of science. And in playing it, I discovered something which made me sad and also has informed me as I read the lives of female scientists going forward. It really helps if you have a husband or a partner who understands your passion for science. And we're talking now about the turn of the 20th century with Hertha Ayrton. If she hadn't had a scientific partner, I don't think she could have accomplished what she accomplished. And I was looking at the women in STEM today because I wanted to sort of refresh my mind. And I think of somebody like Katherine Johnson. You know who I'm talking about, don't you? We know that she is an absolute pioneer, right, in NASA science. And not only was she driven, exceedingly smart, but she was African American. And none of those things colored her journey. What defined her journey was her love of the science that she was determined to pursue. So this is the one thing I see again and again in women in STEM. It's a determination that exceeds anything I've seen in other fields, including my own. And on that note, I'll say this, and then we'll go back to the interview. You know, I played Janeway for 7 years. She was a scientist. She was the captain of a starship. And since that time, it is not young actresses who come to me. It is not a preponderance of young artists who want to know what I think. It's young female scientists, each one of them compelled to go into one of the fields of STEM. And that alone makes me want to say to anybody watching our interview or listening to it, it's worth it if you are a woman to apply yourself to these fields. It is somehow the one thing that seems to transcend all of our cultures. By that, I mean, the great takeaway from Star Trek Voyager is science, isn't it?
Absolutely. I set out in life to be a scientist. My goal was to study medicine. I was a biology major at Yale for nearly 2 years, and my hobby of theater sort of took over. But I often say that the wonderful thing about having worked on Star Trek is that over the arc of my life, Star Trek brought me back to science by introducing me to so many people who were inspired by watching Star Trek as young people who grew up to be principal investigators at NASA or astronauts or other fields in science and technology, and how they credit the franchise that we were part of with having helped them choose their life's work, what they really wanted to do, because they saw Star Trek as dreaming a dream that science and technology would help us someday accomplish. And if you think about all of the things that are posited in Star Trek, starting with the original series, the handheld communicators and everything that we've seen come into our lives, all of these technologies that were dreamed up, that have come to pass, I often think that in my sick bay set as the doctor on Voyager, I had a little tiny computer monitor that seemed impossibly small for its day. And while we were still on the air, they were making laptop computers that were smaller still. So just in the space of our original broadcasts, technology was changing and growing so much that
Right.
that our props that were supposedly from the 24th century started to look
reality in our hands. Yes, yes.
Because of this opportunity to meet people who have been inspired by Star Trek, that have these extraordinary careers, and young people who are dreaming of careers in science and technology, watching Star Trek, meeting you in person. What do you talk a little about the lasting effect of having played the first female captain of a starship in a franchise that had been completely male dominated through the mid 90s when you took command? Talk a little bit about the lasting impact of that character.
Well, I've talked about this a lot. And whenever I do, I think it's insufficient to the truth, which is that I stepped into something about which I was largely ignorant. I didn't really know much about Star Trek, and even less about science fiction. But I loved the character, I loved the idea, and of course I was eager to take the role, and did. But in hindsight, I realized that those 7 years of playing Captain Janeway, who was a scientist first and a captain second, taught me more about the importance of science in our culture than anything else. It certainly didn't, I think, teach me to be, a better artist. What it taught me to be was a more astute chronicler of what it is to be a woman in science. And I think what I will be left with, certainly my obit will say, Captain Janeway, but what it will mean is that I think she had an extraordinary influence over young women in the fields of STEM. You know, I told you this story once. At the end, do you remember at the end of the first season when Mrs. Clinton invited me to the White House to speak to women in science? She'd culled an international group of young scientists who she thought were particularly promising. And she could think of no one better than I to talk to them about their futures, which is absurd because...
No, I can't think of anyone better either.
So I went and I spent hours writing this speech, and I walked up to the podium and I looked at this sea of absolutely guileless, alert, intelligent, ardent faces, and I just threw it away. And I said to them, I don't have anything to say to you that you cannot say to me 1,000,000 times over, and more importantly, and more astutely. So let's get into science and art. What is it about Janeway that inspired you? And they all said, well, there were a few exceptions, but most of them said that they'd watched Voyager with their parents, in most cases, their mother. And the mother had turned and said to the daughter, you're going into research. You think you're going into research, but you see that lady on television is telling you that you can go up. You can get into the ship. You can reach the stars. And that's all it took, Bob. That's all it took for a lot of them to absolutely change course and make these decisions. So if that's a legacy that I can leave, I can think of a greater thing.
And this is something that predate this influence of Star Trek on people captivated by science and exploration obviously predates our involvement with the franchise. Nichelle Nichols, quite famously, was reached out on behalf of NASA to women and people of color to step forward and become and to train as astronauts. In other words, she was very influential in outreach in her day, and really began this tradition of the the hand in glove relationship between Star Trek and NASA. I have had the honor of hosting panels at Comic-Con and elsewhere with real people in science, with the principal astronomer of the new James Webb telescope, still unlaunched, and Kjell Lindgren, an astronaut, and all that. And basically, the subject of the conversation was, we started with the idea of how Star Trek helps to inspire people to want to enter into these scientific fields. But then it was interesting to see how each one of them, where that led them individually. And aside from the wonderful people like you, Kate, that I got to work with for 7 years, the other extraordinary gift that Star Trek has given me is placing me in the context of all of these people that I met through the show and were inspired by the show, to sit on stage with 5 men who had walked on the moon, and to get to ask them questions about the just.
I know. I mean, it's the best kind of kismet, the best kind of serendipity, because you're an actor, but you're playing someone in a science fiction program, and it lends itself to all of these sort of introductions and entrees and things. Did I ever tell you about the time I was doing I think it was just a sort of a panel in San Diego, but it was live in front of a large audience. And there were about 5 of us involved, one of whom was Sally Ride, the astronaut. Mm-hmm. And she was late. There was a storm and she was late. And she came sort of staggering onto the stage about a half hour into the event. And she was all wet. And I said, "Oh my God, Sally, what happened?" She said, "I'm so sorry. I just, getting here was just a disaster." And I said, "What? Well, didn't you fly?" And she said, "Oh no, I hate airplanes." I had to laugh. I said, "You do?" She said, "Yeah, I don't like to fly." I said, "Oh, only space will do." Of course.
And if she's piloting.
Yeah, she was a wonderful woman. That was a great evening to try to get into her head and find out what it is about a female astronaut. What is it about that kind of woman that she wants to do that? I'll tell you what it is. It's a kind of extraordinary must-have. It's a singular passion without explanation or apology. She needs to go to space. She wants to go to space. She is going to space. And I got that from Sally. I've got that in all of my reading. That was true of Hertha Ayrton. That was true of Marie Curie in their fields. The one thing about which I am despondent, the great concerning thing, is that women in STEM are still not paid what men in STEM are paid. Do you know that?
I'm not surprised to hear that.
No, it wavers between 10 and I think 19% less in pay, which must be somehow altered. That's got to be corrected. If it can't happen in STEM, where is it going to happen, for heaven's sake?
Well, 25 or now 26 years ago, when you were cast as the first female captain in a franchise, as I mentioned, that had been very male dominated, perhaps you could analogize some of those challenges with challenges women are still facing today in historically male dominated professions.
It's brutal. You know that, Bob. You're one of the most sensitive men in the field of acting that I know, which is why I love you and why we have such a good friendship. I think you understand that the great problem here is that we share the same passion, but we're not treated as if we share the same passion. The female actress is expected to exceed her male counterpart. And so that's what I felt, if you want to know. I felt that I had to be better prepared, more punctual, more receptive, more responsive, more adroit. I had to be available at all times. I had to, when asked, put my children to the side, which was very hard indeed, in a way that I don't think that men are ever asked to do. And not only that, it's just never acknowledged that a woman has these other concerns. So I think for the first season, I was in a state of real trepidation. You know as well as I do that those guys would come in, both the brass and the producers, folded arms, staring at the bridge. And I felt, because I had so much at stake, they just want me to fail. They're waiting. They've got some guy in the wings, which I'm sure they did, by the way. But after about a year, I came to my senses. Of course, she was established by then, and I had gained some confidence, and I just made up my mind to take her all the way. And I think that this is what women in STEM are dealing with all the time. And it's such a waste of time, because all of those hours of trepidation, of concern, am I good enough? Is it going to happen? Are such a waste of time, and can be spent on the moon, right? On the bridge, saying action, writing the book, becoming an engineer, becoming a great mathematician. And I think I wrote it down because I was so struck by it. Oh, this is what Rear Admiral Grace Hopper said. She said, if it's a good idea, go ahead and do it. It's much easier to apologize than it is to get permission. And that's what I would say to women. Just go ahead and bloody do it. Really.
Well, that's a very important message, and I think that it folds right into what we're celebrating. This is Planet Fest. We are landing our newest rover next week, which is, and I work in the Planetary Society. We have various. Can
you tell us about your history with the Planetary Society?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. While Voyager was still in its first run in the late 90s, I was asked to do a fundraiser to honor Ray Bradbury's writing. It was on I believe his 70th birthday, and an extraordinary group of actors from, Charlton Heston, John Rhys Davies, several of us from the Star Trek franchise, Tim Russ, John Delancey, myself, we all read selections from the book. And I thought it was just I was very impressed with the people that I met that night, including Mr. Bradbury, and the mission of this Planetary Society, which I had not known about before. Then they asked me to join their advisory council, basically to reach out to the science fiction community and hopefully engage and interest them in our society and perhaps becoming members. And then I got very involved with challenges for young people in STEM. At the time we'd landed our first rover in the late 90s, the Sojourner, I spearheaded something called Red Rover, offered kids in middle school and high school the opportunity to build a rover out of Lego parts, and then they would build their own Martian surface at their high school. Then they would ship their rover to another high school, and the other high school sent their rover to your high school, and you would explore each other's Martian surfaces with your rover and send the data back via the internet. It was the perfect analog for what we were doing at that moment in space with the Sojourner rover. So, and there were subsequent challenges. I talked our producers on Star Trek into making the first public service announcement on a Star Trek set about something called the Mars Millennium Project in, I think, late 1999. And so it just was a way that I could use my visibility on Star Trek, playing this future technology character, and hope to engage and excite young people about entering fields related to space exploration.
Oh, it's wonderful, Bob. It's wonderful. And I think it's been fascinating for you, the people you've met, the things you've learned, the places you've gone. When are you going up? Are you going to go up with that group? There's a mission to a moon of Jupiter. I think there is. Yes, there is. Imminent. And they need to have still one more seat. I think you should take it, Bob.
Well, all right. I'm going to give it some serious thought. As you know, I hate to be in a crowded
But have dinner with me in New York first.
I'll never forget when I visited the Johnson space. Let me ask you
this, Roberto. This is fair. Would you, if you could? Would you go up? Would you go to space if you could?
You know, I think I would love to, and it would be the psychological training, the feeling of enclosure, and also the long term. Once you make that commitment, you know, it takes a long time to get to Mars, as you know. I believe.
How long does it take?
I think something like 9 months. I believe.
9 months. You could have a baby in 9 months.
Well, I wouldn't do that as well. That would be just overburdening myself. But I
don't know. Never say never, and never say die. Right.
No, I think I'm more comfortable with inspiring others to take these courageous leaps. But it's a question we all get asked at one time or another. Would you like to go into space? And I think if I were a younger man and I had and I went through the training, I think I would love to do it.
You know, it's funny. I used to feel as you feel, up until very shortly, as a matter of fact, until very recently. I think I'd go now. I'd go because I think it is the future, because I think it is infinite and of infinite interest and possibility. I'm not sure I want to take an extravagant mission, but I would go to visit that moon of Jupiter. I would, or I would go to Mars 9 months. Because I think there would be a hell of a learning curve that I could take. And why not? Why not? And then sail on into the sunset. Maybe I'd be so old by the end of it, they'd just push me out the window. And Janeway would forever be floating in space. That's appropriate, isn't it?
Absolutely. Burial in space.
Okay.
Those were always there were a few solemn moments on Voyager where we buried people in space, and that always was very captivating to me. That you just were, it was your remnants were traveling in the cosmos. It seemed.
But there you are.
So romantic.
I mean, there you are. That says it all. Unlike a burial at sea, which is so starkly abrupt, over, the body slides from out under the flag into the sea. There's a permanence and an urgency to it and a darkness to it. But in space, you float. So the question is, do you die? I mean, in the infinitude of space, I truly believe that the philosophical as well as the scientific must be embraced. They are married in space. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I think I would go.
Well, that both religion and space share the concept of infinity, you have to admit. So I understand how you could say that's where they overlap. And if we are indeed made of stardust, it's certainly returning ourselves, instead of from dust to dust, it's from stardust to stardust.
Yeah.
You asked me, let me just finish up my planetary story. Eventually, I was asked to be on the executive board. I went from being on the advisory council to the executive board, and it's just an extraordinary group of people, and a number of whom are women, and from where I sit, very young women in science who are absolutely brilliant, and including our new president. Bethany Ellman. So we have some extraordinary, very extraordinary people that I love sitting around that conference table when we have a board meeting and just listening. And I guess I'm up to, full comprehension of about 30% of what's being said. And I think that's extraordinary considering where I started.
It's absolutely terrific. It's so impressive. It's great. Yes.
Well, I'm delighted that you joined us today to celebrate Planet Fest. You are a great friend to the Planetary Society. You are hugely admired by people all over the world, and especially young women, for your trailblazing role as Captain Janeway.
All right.
in Star Trek, and it's 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 one of the great things about Star Trek is that it is evergreen. People constantly, new generations of people discover it. They may watch the newer series first, but they always watch all of it, and that means that Catherine Janeway will be inspiring women for many, many years to come.
Well, I think that's a pretty wonderful thing to say. And I'm going to ask again that if I'm ever invited or inclined to go to space, that you will accompany me, my great friend, and we will have that adventure together. It's not too late. I think we should think about this.
I think so too. You could calm me down if I got a little nervous. You could, you could talk me down from of course, from weightlessness.
Talk you down from what?
From floating on the
Don't
ceiling.
go out there, Bob. All right. Well, this has been a great pleasure. You know, I adore you. I think the Planetary Society is just a wonderful thing. And I'm going to bid a Stardust farewell. And I'm going to particularly wish all women thinking about STEM, all women in STEM, all women responsible for STEM, go ahead. Do what Rear Admiral Hopper said. Just do it. Apologize later. Bye, darling. Bye.
Bye-bye.